Let us proceed with our discussions related to the literature review. You know that the literature review is an important process in the research study, helping the researchers to gain understanding of a research topic, establishing the fundamental principles, knowing how to carry out the research, knowing the state of development of the technology, knowing the research gap, and knowing where we're going to proceed with the research development. In these videos, I would like to share my personal experience in doing the literature review. Different persons may do it differently. So far, after many times trying and error, I have adapted with the current process, which I feel it is more effective to me and worth sharing with you. Before I share the process that I'm going through for the literature review, first let me share the features of the literature review which I feel is important. I always remind myself about this while doing the literature review. First, the research articles that I refer will need to be relevant. Having a research topic decided, the first step here is to search for the research article. I'm searching for the relevant articles based on the keywords through the internet, journals and database. Normally, by the time that we acquire the relevant articles, we cannot fully tell that whether those articles are related or not. It may seem to be related, but as you go along with the review, you realize that it is not relevant. Sometimes, some articles may not seem to be relevant. They end up to have some important informations that you need in order for you to complete your research. So, during the searching stage, normally I will search as many articles as possible. Of course, top priority are given to those seems to be relevant. It may be directly related to your research topic or indirectly related to the research topic. Those which are directly related to the research topic, including the scope of the study, similar, the technology and design, similar, and those which are not directly related to the research topic, it can be due to some principles that is a part and parcel of the research topic. But the bottom line here is it must be related to your research study. At the end of the day, whatever that you put into your literature review later, it has to be relevant and it must serve the purpose of doing this review for the sake of the research. Second, it should be as thorough as possible. We will need to search for the research article, as many as possible, which is relevant to the research topic, so that you will not miss certain important studies, especially those who have revolutionized the relevant knowledge or giving significant contributions to the knowledge of the topic. These are the papers that you should not miss. So you should search as many papers as possible until reaching a point of saturation where you find yourself spending too much time searching for new papers and most of the relevant papers are more or less there. Next important features of doing the literature review is that you yourself need to understand the topic. You cannot write and teach other people for something that you do not fully understand. Your personal understanding, it will be the most important of all, because the biggest benefits will go to the persons who do the literature review. You will need to make sense of whatever that you have read. In the case that there are any doubts, questions, confusions, you will need to seek for answers. Don't just leave it there. Otherwise, you will find yourself in the trouble that not being able to properly explain something, and this is going to affect your quality of the discussions, interpretations, and also comprehensions at the later stage of your research study. You might misunderstood something, which ultimately leads to the flaws to your research as well as your findings, and this is going to be very critical to your research study. Next, a good literature review should be principle driven. You need to properly establish the fundamental principles, concepts, and theories related to your research topic. Normally, I will put my emphasis on the principles instead of who doing what research. Personally, I am not quite interested of who are doing what kind of research. I am more interested of what the person learned from the research. So most of the writings as well as the discussions shall focus on the principles, concepts, and theories. Next, I need to make sure myself not to be biased, that I cannot simply refer to one research article to conclude on certain concepts and principles. Normally, there are relevant studies and similar research. I will make cross-checking between the concept and findings as disclosed from different research articles to observe the consistency before it is being established in my literature review. Special attentions are also given to those contradicting opinions given by different researchers. Sometimes the findings from a researcher may contradict to the findings by the other researcher. Normally, I will not criticize or judge which researchers is right and which one is wrong, since it is already being published, and most of the published papers that I review are from the renowned journals. I will first assume that both are correct. For the contradicting findings, it could be due to some other factors. In this case, I will look into their scope of studies, their conditions, their parameters, their assumptions, and probably their limitations, trying to figure out why are the findings different. In the case that I do not know the answers, why are they different, and since the topic is important, I will just note the existence of the discrepancy to make known to the readers about it. Since I myself do not have any answer for that, I will be frank to the readers regarding it. In the case that I make any speculations trying to explain the discrepancy in terms of the findings given by different researchers, the statement that I write in my literature review will have to reflect that, implying that I am making speculations. The statement I use will not have very high level of certainty. Instead, it should imply the possibility, belief, or speculations. This is so that not to mislead the readers regarding my personal opinions over the case there. Next, it will be the critical review. You know that literature review sometimes is very personal. The facts, figures, principles, concept, theories, there are something which is objective. These are something that we cannot make up by ourselves. But putting all this together, there will be a process of synthesis. I will look into the underlying principles to see the connections between the phenomena, the response of the parameters, and even the findings given by the researchers. I will also always remind myself to be skeptical to whichever claim and opinions given by the relevant authors. They may not always be right, Whatever applicable to their case may not necessarily be applicable to mine. Whichever opinions given by them may not necessarily be an universal answer to all studies. There should be some critical inputs given by the reviewer as the outcome of synthesizing the knowledge gained through the literature review process. This kind of input will have to be on basis of some logical sense, objective in nature, properly justified, with solid background of knowledge and fundamentals. It cannot just be any simple opinion that is not well justified. Normally, I don't do critiques to the papers that I review, although you can do so. But if you really need to critique on certain publications, you have to do your own homework. Make sure what you are criticizing are well justified. You will need to be fair to the researchers who did the research. It will need to be objective and not personal. And your ultimate purpose here is to give your opinions, but not to spoil the reputations of the researchers. This one you have to be careful. Since I am the person who write the literature review, if I doubt the credibility given by certain publications, or if I cannot make sense of any principles and findings given by the relevant researcher, normally I just leave it out and not to be put into my review. This is of course after I have done my homework, still cannot make sense of those findings, and it doesn't agree with the other researchers, and to avoid myself criticizing the researchers for something that I may not be right, I will just leave it out and not to mention it in my literature review. Next, a literature review shall be purpose-driven. While doing the literature review, there will be questions, as it is a process for me trying to understand and make sense of the research topic. Now, this literature review process is for me to find for the answers. The purpose of the literature review is try to understand the research topic from the head to tail. If I encounter anything which I'm not sure, unclear, I will need to search for answers from the other research articles. And those things will need to be useful for my research. So there is a purpose of doing this literature review. It is not just to summarize the previous studies. It is for me to establish the fundamental principles, to equip myself so that I can carry out my research study competently. Pay attention on the facts and figures. The discussions are on the basis of the facts and evidence. Normally, we will need to cross-check the relevant facts and figures, trace the source of the informations, review the credibility of the relevant informations before we put them into our literature review. While stating those informations, we will need to use the precise terminologies in order to avoid confusions by the readers. We need to be careful with whichever statement that we write in our literature review, so that we do not mislead the readers. Last but not least, it would be the patience. There are so many features related to the literature review. All these are quite common, known by most of the students. But the last one here, I feel is the most important, based on my personal observations from my students and even myself. This will be the critical part for a quality literature review. Most of the students, they find literature review very difficult. Reading the research articles is very boring, very difficult to understand. So many informations, difficult to remember, too complex to understand, the informations are scattered, having difficulty to make sense of the principles and the concepts, difficulty with English, and all sort of problem. My personal advice to the students is, you will have to get started. You will need to start somewhere. Although there are so many difficulties, so many discouraging factors, since you are in the research already, be it final year project in the undergraduates or the research study in the postgraduate, one way or another you will have to do the literature review. Having yourself worrying how to carry out the review, might as well you get started. Start small, start with areas that you can manage, and then slowly grow your coverage, grow your understanding, grow your knowledge, and grow your competency. This is a learning process. You need to get started and grow slowly. And if you are patient enough, the next thing you know, a quality literature review has been completed. Just remember that you need to stay focused, doing one task at one time. Whatever literature review that you've seen from any publications, be it thesis, be it review paper, be it journal paper, be it conference papers, normally these literature reviews are not the outcome of one-time job. There will be numerous times of repeated revisions, corrections, writings and rewritings. It is not one-time job like most of the students thought it is. What you see that has already been published, those are the final outcome, which is the final versions after numerous trials. So when you do the literature review, don't expect yourself to be able to complete everything nicely at one go. This will not happen. At least for my personal case, it never happened before. And my personal experience, to do a good literature review, a lot of papers will need to be read. The process is very long, normally takes me few months, and there are many versions of writing and rewriting until the final versions come out. It normally starts with very messy informations and point, then it will need to be refined and further refined until it comes to an optimum state. Then the final versions come out. Normally at the early stage, the points and the writings are not as concise, quite diluted. Then after going through several rounds of refine and further refine, the statements become more concise and concentrated. The terminology become more precise. The statements are more carefully written. The possibility of miscommunicating or misunderstanding has been minimized. Now it depends on your personal conditions, on the numbers of revisions that you need to make on the draft of your literature review. The rule of thumb, it will be until a state that you find your literature review more or less established, not much changes will need to be made, then your final versions is more or less there. If you still observe many changes to be made, or if you still find yourself to be not quite satisfied with the literature review, most likely you have to repeat the revision process. The more refined you do the literature review, this is closely related to your patience, then the quality of the literature review will be achieved. This is about the important features for the literature review, which I found it to be important. In our next videos, I'm going to share my experience and my process of doing the literature review. Stay